as a result, I've certainly run into some resistance and been called a pseudoscientist and worse by some of the department heads of archaeology in uh, the University of California system. Some people that I've known for 20 or 25 years, all of a sudden popped up and said, I always figured you were a New Ager or something like that. And but the funny thing is, Atlantis in America has come out. We have found a lot more confirmation of what Eli Zapp and I stated about the peopling of the Americas, and we found a lot more confirmation that there were diverse people here, that the concept of Atlantis as the center of a navigational culture could, in fact, have existed in the Americas because the story that you find in textbooks in junior high, high school, and college still is wrong. Uh, it's based on this concept of Beringia migration of peoples from northeast Siberia and Asia. People with short skulls, broad-faced, uh, peopling the Americas about 11,500 years ago as hunter-gatherers, Clovis spear point hunters, that these were the first Americans. And now we have found Americans who are older, right, who have long, narrow skulls. They're biliocephalic. They resemble Europeans or South Pacific Islanders, Polynesians, much more than they do your Mongoloid populations from Northeast Asia. So based on the new things that we're finding, I think that's part of the reason that the History Channel got in contact with me, because the producer of this show, Bill Curtis, happened to be in Cozumel last summer when the INA, that's the National Institute of Archaeology and History in Mexico, exhumed a body from an underwater cave. It had been trapped there for over 12,000 years, and this body turned out to be biliocephalic. That means that the cranial facial structure of the skeleton was that of a South Pacific Islander or European, a Cro-Magnon.
Really?
And during recent years, Dr. Sylvia Gonzalez has found a woman that she called a young woman near Mexico City that's been radiocarbon dated to 12,500 years ago, and she is biliocephalic. The earliest human remains found in the Northwest are those of a man now called Kennewick Man, dates to 9,300 years ago. And, when they reconstructed his face, they got this guy from Star Trek. And they said, it looked very likely that this was a European. But it also looked very likely that it would be a South Pacific Islander. Again, they both have the long, narrow face characteristic. So actually, the archaeologists who told me a few years back that I was on the wrong track and that what they were finding at site, they didn't have any skeletons that dated back 12,000 years ago until the last 2 years. And now that we're getting them, we find that, they're not Paleo-Indians at all. They're a different type of people. It was a real place. And the reason I think so is because Plato repeatedly wrote in the Critias and Timaeus, this is fact, not fiction. This is passed on down to me by my grandfather Solon. Solon was one of the great lawgivers, one of the most respected of the Greek political leaders before Plato. Plato himself founded his own university in Athens, and his university was certainly, everything was put at risk when he wrote about Atlantis, if Atlantis were in fact a fiction or a fantasy. And I don't think Plato would mislead people in this way. Now, there are some people who claim, well, Plato was trying to make a point, and he used the myth of Atlantis to make the point about how Athenian society should be. Actually, this is not the way Plato operated at all. Through the dialectic, which was taught to him by Socrates, they used a form of investigating truth that would preclude that sort of deception. Another reason for believing in Atlantis is that the myth is not limited to Plato. In the central part of the Americas, and I go down there every winter to Belize and Guatemala and the Yucatan of Mexico, and I investigate Mayan myths and their belief that there was a god named Kukulkan who sailed across the sea thousands of years ago, bringing the arts of civilization, language, lawmaking, but primarily mathematics and astronomy. And they used these arts in building their pyramids, and the stone evidence of an advanced culture going back thousands of years in the central part of America is fairly overwhelming. I mean, it overwhelms me, and I believe that if this was not Atlantis, it was something very similar to Atlantis. And these people, all these creation myths talk about an early people coming across the sea with the arts of civilization. They never talk about people walking over ice sheets to found civilization or their culture. So I've just followed up on what the myths have said, and they're in the same area where we find the speakers today in Belize, and in Guatemala and in the Yucatan. You know, they're talking about a culture that we do find evidences of in stone monuments, in perfect stone monuments, like the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. This is a focal part of the.
I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either going to be okay.
No, stop.
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
A focal part of the program, the Lost Atlantis, we spent a day and a half at Chichen Itza in about a heat index of about 122 degrees. And I was standing in front of the camera and trying not to sweat too much or to mellow away. Ivar Zapp, about 13 years ago, he had already been studying the stone spheres of Costa Rica. He'd been studying them for about 20 years. The thing about the stone spheres that is the most remarkable, they're remarkable in some of them are 7 feet in diameter and weigh 18 tons and are perfectly spherical to within 2 centimeters, some of the large ones. The remarkable thing is the precision needed to construct something like this, because under our own technology, we could not have constructed a sphere so perfect until the discovery of the laser. So people thousands of years ago in the central part of the Americas were knowledgeable to an extent that something was lost. You know, humanity dumbed down for a few thousand years. And whether we're starting to wise up again or not is still in debate. But a lot of things are pointing now that there's a lot of knowledge exploding around the world. A lot of things coming together. So that's a very hopeful sign. The spheres of Costa Rica have probably are not as famous as they should be, considering how extraordinary they are.
Well, let's talk about them just for a minute.
They do not appear to be machined, but you know, there are no marks. There are no chisel marks. There are no sanding marks. They're just perfect spheres. You know, like I say, possibly by a laser. But
Well,
you know, there's a lot of controversy here. There are a lot of archaeologists who've examined them who said, you know, you can do this. You can do this by sanding. You can do this by bobbing them in water. There are all kinds of ways that you could make a perfect sphere like that. But when you're talking about something that's 7 feet in diameter and is solid granite,
Right.
well, you make a little mistake and you're not going to have a perfect sphere. You know, we have our own strain of technology, but the people who have understood our technology the best have understood the limitations of the human mind. Thomas Edison is perhaps the greatest inventor of the last 150 years or so. And has said, he said in the past, we don't know 1/millionth of what there is to know. And when he said we, he wasn't talking about his little group at Menlo Park,
Right.
group of inventors working on all this stuff. He was talking collectively. We as humankind don't know 1/millionth of what there is to know.
Right.
He was able to figure out how to, you know, use electricity, invent the light bulb, do all this kinds of stuff. And yeah, I have a distinct impression that he feels that electricity is something we stumbled upon. We could have stumbled upon something different.
So.
Amazing that when you look at all the things, you know, talking about the pyramids again, talking about building structures outside of Cusco in Peru in the Andes is what they call a fortress, but it isn't really. It's called Sacsayhuaman. And it has some stones that weigh over 200,000 pounds and that are fitted in with other stones to make up a wall, fitting together 13 to 16 faucets. You know, it's like someone, it's like a dentist making a bridge for you, fitting it into your teeth. And if it doesn't fit right, then he pulls it back out and grinds it down a little bit too. But when you're talking about a 200,000 pound stone, if they didn't grind it to the preciseness that it now has on the very first try, how would you keep lifting up this 200,000 pound stone and polishing it down to make it fit? In other words, our technology just doesn't have the imagination to figure out how this was built. And I found that in Mesoamerica that the earliest level of construction at most sites, you know, and most of the sites there have several levels of construction. At Tikal and at Teotihuacan, the earliest levels have the largest and most precisely built blocks.
Huh.
The worst construction
Wow,
is
that's
by the Aztecs. And of course, the Aztecs only got in the Central Valley of Mexico, or took over the Central Valley of Mexico, about 200 years before that guy, the conquistadors, arrived. And they were a pretty warlike people and a pretty brutal people, and they did... I think that they practiced sacrifice a lot more than their predecessors had, although sacrifice was part of the Americas,
right.
And part of the world. You know, it has been done all over the world. But anyhow, named back to the Aztec. When you look at Aztec construction, it's rocks about the size of a football or sometimes the size of a small grapefruit, and they're just put together with a whole lot of mortar. And when you look at the Toltec constructions, which they are built over, the Toltecs, you know, had better building techniques. And then if you look under the Toltec level to structures that were built by the people that we'll call Teotihuacanos, because we don't know who they were, but they lived at Teotihuacan, then we're seeing levels of construction that are precise and often require no mortar because they fit perfectly, the blocks fit perfectly. We go back in time, we find that rather than a progression from a more primitive to a more sophisticated, we go back in time, we go from a more primitive here to a more sophisticated in the deep past. The proof of that occurs in many examples. A really great one has come up recently, recorded by Vine Deloria, who wrote a book called Red Earth, White Lies. In this book, Vine Deloria tells the story of the Klamath people, and this is not just Vine Deloria, who is an American Indian, and has a PhD and teaches at the university, but he has his research in this matter has been duplicated by David Hurst Thomas and published in a book called Skull Wars, which is about the discovery of Kenilworth Man and so on. But the story of the Klamath, if I can tell it briefly, I'll try. In the 1870s, a soldier, a lieutenant who was stationed in a fort near where the Klamath Indians lived in southern Oregon, became aware of the fact that no Klamath Indian would go anywhere near Crater Lake. And Crater Lake, if you've ever been there, is just a beautiful, intense blue, and it's up in the mountains, and quite often there's snow, and there are beautiful mountains, green trees, and this crystal blue water. So the lieutenant couldn't figure out why Klamath Indians, when, if they even heard the mention of Crater Lake, would hold their head down and say, we can't go there.
Right.
And he found a chief who told him a story. And he said, this is a story that my grandfather was told by his grandfather. And it was a time when this Crater Lake was a mountain, a volcano called Mount Manzana. And Mount Manzana was the home to an evil spirit. And this evil spirit fell in love with a beautiful Indian princess and kidnapped her and took her into the mountain. This enraged the spirit that lived in Mount Shasta, 100 miles to the south. The spirit in Mount Shasta was a good spirit, and the Mount Shasta erupted and hurled stones at Mount Manzana. Mount Manzana, in turn, erupts and hurls stones at Mount Shasta. And the story goes on that eventually the princess is saved, and Mount Manzana, in a fit of absolute, rage, blows his top. The spirit has to go deep down under the mountain, and the top having been blown off the mountain, the volcano no longer exists, and the waters from rain fill in and create the lake. But the Klamath Indians believed if you stared into that lake, you could possibly see the evil spirit that was there, and he could capture your soul. Now, that sounds pretty far-fetched, but subsequently, in the late 1920s, the U.S. Geological Survey worked for 12 years to try to put together what had happened to form Crater Lake. What they found was that about 7,800 years ago, it had been a mountain, which they call Mount Manzana, and that this mountain had been almost the same height as Mount Shasta, in the region of 14,000 feet.
Wow.
But the top 3,500 feet of the mountain were blown off in one explosion, which was probably 50 times as great as the one at Mount St. Helens of about 15 years ago. What they also discovered was, though, that prior to that, there was a record written in rock of a great deal of activity between Mount Shasta and Mount Manzana, where they would have explosions and volcanic eruptions which were either at the same time or that followed each other very closely.
My God.
In fact, when they published their report, their record of what happened there was pretty much the same as what the Klamath Indians said happened there. The U.S. Geological team had no idea of what the Klamath Indians had said. They were basically scientists reading the record of the rocks. And they turned out to be the same as what the Klamath Indian chief said, with this exception. The Klamath Indian chief believed that it was his grandfather's grandfather's tale. His grandfather's grandfather may have witnessed it, but it had been 7,800 years. So this shows you the durability of myth. And maybe we should just say oral tradition, because the word myth has been degraded.
I agree.
To the extent that when you say it, you say myths. That's a lie. No, these myths are true. They're great carriers of the truth.
So,
For a long time, my call them the gradualists at universities, the conformists to the gradual evolution of everything theory. These people said, well, yeah, sure, they had some floods, it rained and rained and, floods happen. They happen today. But the Guaymas Indians of northwestern Mexico say that in the Great Flood, a green wall of water came over all of the towns and the countryside and the fields and went up to the top of the mountains where two people at the very peak of the mountain in a cave survived. Now, the thing about the Guaymas Indians, they live about 100 miles inland in Sonora. And if the floods had been the type of flood that we're getting in Southern California right now with rains, the water would have been brown. The water would have been brown with dirt. But when they say a green mound of water came, they're talking about the ocean. They're talking about something that forced the ocean 100 miles inland. Well, at about the same time the mammoth disappeared, the dire wolf, which was the largest wolf to ever live in the Americas, disappeared. The saber-toothed tiger disappeared. Mastodons disappeared. The giant sloth disappeared. The American horse, which the horse was originally an American animal. It developed here in the Americas, migrated to other parts of the world, but disappeared from the Americas about 12,000 years ago.
Is that
The same time that Plato gave to the destruction of Atlantis. So it looks like some very big event did occur. Now, I read Velikovsky years ago, and he felt that it had to be almost like a collision of planets, or a near collision, if I recall. And it doesn't have to be anything that big at all. A meteor half-mile across striking the Earth will destroy about, all of the population for hundreds of miles from the spot in which it hits. And particularly if it hits in the water, it would put off a tsunami that when it hit the coast would be over 3/4 of a mile high by most estimations. That would go 100 miles inland. That would be a green wall of water that could destroy the Guaymas peoples. The introduction of something like a half-mile wide meteor happens, more often than most people think. Because we can't track half-mile wide meteor. We can see Ceres, so, it's 400 miles across.
Right.
We know where it is all the time.
Right.
But there are so many smaller meteors, asteroids that become meteors, that we have no idea where they are right now.
Yeah.
And if they happen to go in toward an orbit toward the sun and then pick up speed, the slingshot effect of coming close to the sun and being thrown back out again, it's doubly dangerous because they'll be traveling about 4 times as fast as they would be normally in space. They'd be moving probably close to 100,000 miles an hour. They pass very close to the sun, and we could never see them because as they're coming out of the sun, you can't see a speck coming out of the sun. And that's what a half-mile wide asteroid would be. We really say, we've mapped 12% of the sky now, and we know where a lot of the potential Earth-crossing asteroids are. And we know where some are, but we don't know about a lot of them. Yeah, the early excavators of the sites like Tikal in Guatemala and so on, when they excavated them, they immediately claimed, this is the oldest and greatest site, the biggest, largest pyramids, so on and so forth. It's the oldest site, and that's what Sylvanus Morley said about Tikal. And then it turned out that there are sites with bigger pyramids, and there are sites that are 3,000 years older that incontrovertibly dated to 3,000 years older, like Cuello in Belize. Now, why would the site that he chose to excavate happen to be the oldest, the biggest, the grandest, and have the tallest pyramids? Well, Plato placed it at 9 1,000 years before his time, and his time was about 2,400 years ago. So if we follow Plato, we're saying that it was 11,400 years ago. 11,400 years ago corresponds to the time when the Pleistocene ended, and the Pleistocene animals, mammoths, American giraffes, American camels, saber-toothed tigers disappeared from the face of the earth.
Okay.
These creatures disappeared. Sea levels worldwide rose 380 feet, and any coastal cities in the Americas, which I believe would have constituted Atlantis, were swallowed up by the rising seas. This event is, of course, one of the versions of what happened during the flood, but it is the Mayan version. The Mayan version of what happened is that Hunahpu, a warrior, shot an arrow at a fixed star in the sky and struck it, and that caused chaos in the heavens and a disorder in the fixed stars in the sky, and that all of the planets, and this is depicted pictorially in the Dresden Codex of the Mayan people, one of the few surviving books. The planet Venus, and the symbol for the planet Venus, the symbol for the planet Mars, the symbol for the planet Jupiter, the symbol for the moon, and for the sun are all pouring water down on the earth at the same time in this pictorial version of the Great Flood. And what it means is that, something that happened on Earth caused a perturbation in the skies, and it was the heavens who rained the destructive floods upon the earth. Well, and that's what Plato said too. He said that the Atlanteans had the greatest civilization in the world, and that they lived in a virtual lush and tropical paradise. And remember, 11,500 years ago, worldwide temperatures were about 27 degrees cooler than they are now.
Okay.
That kind of rules out Ireland. It definitely rules out Antarctica, or even Charles Hapgood's belief that Antarctica may have been 2,000 miles closer to the equator before a crust displacement. Even if it was, it would have been a really cold place.
Right.
Would have been like Argentina, southern Argentina. The size of Atlantis rules out anything in the Mediterranean. So I think that Atlantis was the coastal regions of the Americas and the sunken island of the Caribbean. You've mentioned Bimini earlier. All of the, what they call the Bahama Banks, are less than 400 feet deep. That entire area would have been an island the size of, what is now the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And if there were cities, if there was a developed civilization in the Americas, it would have developed in coastal cities, and Atlantis is described as a coastal city and a navigational capital. So where is Atlantis? Well, I think most of it is underwater. But the remnants, I think, are the survivors who, in myth, arrived at the shores of Yucatan and came with the law-giving abilities of mathematics. The Mayan are known as the first people who had the concept of zero. It doesn't mean that they had it first. It could have been brought to them by even earlier people.
Then
they sailed. They were navigators. Atlantis was supposed to be the navigational center of the world, and we find people we find replicas of people in stone in the Americas that are definitely Negroid. For example, in the Veracruz region, at La Venta, for example, there are stone heads that are even bigger than the spheres in Costa Rica but they are not perfect spheres. They are replications of the heads of Negro people. Now, and we know that some of these go back stratigraphically. We could date them to about 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. They were part of what's known as the Olmec culture. And the Olmecs appear to me to be people from Africa. Now, how hard is it to get from Africa to the Americas? Well, in 1956, Dr. Elaine Bombard got in a virtual bathtub, 5 feet long, with a string with a hook attached to it and a little bucket for collecting rainwater. And 6 weeks later, he arrived at Trinidad in the Caribbean.
Wow.
The sea lanes or the sea currents are virtual conveyor belts. Thor Heyerdahl did the same thing in actually, he inspired this. He did it in 1948 when he got the raft Kon-Tiki built, just like all Peruvians were building their balsa rafts, and rode it with his crew 4,000 miles across the South Pacific.
This episode is brought to you by Workday. Guessing is for game shows, not your business, especially when your margin for error is 0. Workday is the enterprise AI platform for HR, finance, and IT, with a deep understanding of your organization's context and guardrails. So every AI action is permission aware, giving you accuracy 24/7 and the ability to not just get work done, but get it done right. It's a new Workday.
The numbers of people, of the diverse people, we have photographs of in the book Atlantis in America, we have photographs of not only of these Negro-looking people who had kinky beards, some of them, who had braided hair and back, definitely no characteristics that resemble the present-day Maya or Zapotec or Toltec peoples who are in Mesoamerica. But we have Chinese faces at Copan, a Chinese face with a headdress that has the trunks of an elephant on either side. Well, there are markers now that are found in the DNA that show that some American Indians have a marker. I can't think of the name of it right now, I'm sad to say. Have a marker that establishes them as having at least part of their lineage from Europe. And other American Indians do not have it. And that's Haligroup 10, but I just looking for a little information on it. It's something passed through the mitochondria power packs,
Right.
Yeah. And there are 4 major markers in most American Indians, but there's a 5th one called Haligroup 10 that can only be traced to Europe. That complicates things.
Sure does.
And it points to the fact that our history is much more complicated than, the gradualists would have it appear. There was not one migration to the Americas, and it did not happen at one time. There have been many migrations at many different times. And some of these migrations had to have been from Europe. This is what Dennis Stanford in the Smithsonian now holds, that the Clovis-like spheres were just simply a continuation of the bifacial scraping techniques used by the people of France 16,000 years ago, and that there must have been migrations from Europe to the Americas at that time.
Amazing.
The only way you could do it is by sea. And the fact that this Haligroup 10 has shown up in some Indian populations and not in others shows that there was some mixing of European and Indians that goes back thousands of years. Well, they're all separate and independent in a way, but those heads, if you go to Tiwanaku in Bolivia, you're going to find statues that have that very, very flat-looking face, very stern. I mean, the expression and the shape of the skull is absolutely the same in Tijuanacu in the Andes Mountains in Bolivia as it is in Easter Island. And if you go to a place called Tula, about 70 miles outside of Mexico City, you will find these stone warriors 16 feet in height that have the same face. Well, the continuity is one of the attributes of the Atlanteans, according to Plato, was the great knowledge of astronomy and mathematics. And Plato really emphasized those two sciences. The Mayan people were very, very knowledgeable. As I mentioned before, the first known people to have the concept of zero, so that they could count, into the millions, whereas, just a matter of adding zeros. But for people who did not have the concept of zero, that might be hard for us to imagine. Right. It was a different world mathematically. There's that, and then there's the ability that the Mayans had to construct such precise pyramids as the Temple of Kukulkan, which has 91 steps on each of its four sides and one central step. 91 times 4 plus 1 be 365. They're described as the 365 days of the year.
Right.
Each side of the pyramid faces a cardinal direction so precisely that on the northwest facing conjunction of two sides, they put a serpentine figure, basically a snake with a head with feathers, the feathered serpent, which is sometimes called Quetzalcoatl, sometimes called Kukulkan. It's actually a god. It looks very fierce, like a serpent. And on September 21st and on March 21st, in the vernal and fall and vernal spring equinoxes, the sun will describe that serpent. It will light up one level after another until 9 levels of the undulating serpent are described going down the side of the pyramid, and the last thing lit up is the head. And that happens between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. on March 21st and September 21st, and no other time during the year. Built the pyramid in the first place before they moved 100 million tons of rock. They had a precise knowledge of exactly where everything was going to be. Now, the Mayans had that, and the Atlanteans, by reputation, had that. And there are the Mayan mythology of that, the Mayan belief that life is cyclical, that one age gives way to another age, and that something catastrophic happens when one age ends, but another one is born. This is the same concept of the cyclical nature of things. What happened to Atlantis? And what I hear from the modern Maya, the Maya who are still in the Yucatan, is that they feel that the earth is suffering. They feel that the earth has been polluted. The reefs have been destroyed, and the Mayan are people who have used the sea very much in the Caribbean area. They feel that the earth has been wounded, and it's hard. There's this real fine point to this causality. If we're hurtling through space, and it's been decided through Mayan calendars and mathematics that every so often we're going to encounter these stones, then we could be living a pure life and not polluting and destroying and marring our earth, and we'd still get hit.
Right.
But there's also the other thing is that the Mayan believe that the earth itself has been wounded, and that the heavens will set that right. So there's a causality there, which is a separate factor. One is scientific, one is mythic, and both might be true. And the reasons are the same just about every time a civilization disappears. And in Easter Island, let's go back there. That at one time was a tropical island with trees everywhere. Fruits. Now it's barren. Not a tree on Easter Island. Why? Well, man, population evolved on that island, and could not be siphoned off because of the isolation of the island. Maybe they had forgotten the navigation that had brought them there in the first place. Maybe they became too timid. Who knows? They stayed there, and they filled up the island like rabbits fill up a garden. And pretty soon, in order to get the fuel that they needed for fires, they had to someone cut down the last tree. I guess there have been some trees planted since then, right, but basically it's a barren island. What happened to most of the Mayan cities that have been studied in detail, like Copan, is that their populations grew and they prospered, and people came from the countryside into the cities, so that we had city-states in Mesoamerica around 900 AD, about 1100 years ago, with populations of 150,000 people at Caracol, 120,000 at Tikal, possibly 80,000 at Copan. And these are not isolated. I mean, they were all over the place. Coba had over 60,000 people. Chichen Itza had probably about 50 to 60,000 people. Hundreds of other sites. A great population. There were probably in the country of Belize, 2,000 years ago, there were 4 million people. Today, there are 200,000 people. These civilizations collapsed because of their farming techniques, which were intensive, particularly in the growing of corn, but also beans and peppers and other crops, and the fact that they set themselves up to be so dependent on the environment being kind to them, the rains coming. And when the rain stopped, when drought occurred in these areas, the water became polluted and the crops failed and the civilization disappeared. It's something that man has gone through in other parts of the world, but definitely it happened in the Americas, that we became too dependent on what I would call a kind environment. And when it became unkind, it was too devastating. People just simply had to leave. Probably there was a lot of warfare involved too. When things go bad, people have a tendency to get short-tempered and blame each other, Right. If we are so arrogant to tax nature to its limits, in hopes that it will just always perform to our behalf, without giving any consideration to it, without being prepared for nature to perhaps not always be so kind to us, then we're going to have the same problems. Ours probably is going to take the form of increased sea levels, just exactly what happened to Atlantis and what happened to the world 11,500 years ago. And it's probably going to happen because of this global warming. 95% of the scientists in the world agree that the global warming is happening and that it is irreversible. Right. And 5% of them are employed by the Bush administration to tell the world that, hey, global warming doesn't exist. So I'm not picking on Bush particularly, but I am saying that people throughout the world, if they treat our natural world in such a way that it beleaguers our natural world, it's going to have repercussions. The Mayans believe that this is not universal, but some of them who are now writing believe that the year 2012 describes a time when the Earth will pass through the ecliptic of the galaxy. In other words, the center. It'd just be like crossing the equator, for a moon crossing the equator of the Earth.
Right.
There is some belief among some scientists that at this ecliptic, there is less protection from some of these forces, like the gamma rays, the effect of black holes. And
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. See terms.
Consequences of explosions of novas and debris in space.
Right.
And that this might tie it. The book is Atlantis in America, Navigators of the Ancient World, and it's available through Barnes & Noble and Amazon and your usual sources. Unfortunately, there aren't as many independent bookstores, metaphysical bookstores in the country as there once were. This is the type of bookstore you would find it at, so it just depends on your city. The website is www.atlantisinamerica.com with no spaces.
Perfect.
And that'll get you to me if you wanted to get a book from me, signed or something. Feel free to contact me through the website and the email address there. And it also describes some tours that we run. We run tours for the University of Pennsylvania, and we're setting up some for universities here in Arizona at this Thunderbird University. We run some trips for the University of California system, UC Berkeley and UCLA. So we have the ability to run larger trips with groups of students, but basically we run pretty small groups. Keep it sort of intimate and people, find those things that they're looking for.
Right.
At the sites in the Yucatan and in Belize and in Guatemala. Yeah, and if you go on a stock tour where they've got someone describing priests cutting out the beating heart and flinging it down the stairs of the pyramid and describing the Pyramid of Kukulkan as a ceremonial center, well, if it were just a ceremonial center, how could it be so mathematically precise in its construction? Why would you build something like that if you were such a primitive that you spent most of your time cutting out bleeding hearts, And why would you live in such a city? And why would that city, have 60,000 people? Why would Tikal have 120,000 people? Certainly they wouldn't be drawn in by the chance that some priest is going to grab them, pick them up and sacrifice them.
Right.
So there's a lot of hooey that goes on at these sites. Then the sites are so marvelous, but if you hear some of the things the guys say, just are unbelievable. And a lot of people want to believe just that, just like the Catholic Church when they came here with the missionaries wanted to have a reason, have a justification for what they did to the Toltec and Mayan people, destroying their civilization, bringing them disease and death, and that they had pointed toward sacrifice. So that's something that's still being emphasized 400 years after Columbus.